This message is brought to you by Alliance Bible Church located in Mequon, Wisconsin. Our vision is to captivate generations with the satisfying gospel of Jesus Christ. For more information about Alliance Bible Church or other resources, please check out our website, myabc.church.
How can a series on the Ten Commandments be called The Good Life? I'm sure that for some people, when they hear the phrase the Ten Commandments, it doesn't bring up thoughts of a good life. It brings up feelings of drudgery. We don't necessarily associate the Ten Commandments with the good life. So why is this series on the Ten Commandments called The Good Life? Well, I would contend that the Ten Commandments provide us with our telos. T-E-L-O-S. Our telos. It's a Greek word, and it's actually an idea that the New Testament writers expound upon with some detail. Telos is the appointed function or the appointed role of something. Its proper place, so to speak. That's a telos. The appointed function, role, purpose, place, lane to drive in. That's a telos. So, for example, how do you know if a watch is a good watch? How do you know if a watch is a good watch? Well, the first thing you have to figure out is what the watch is supposed to do. If you conclude that a watch is something you use to pound nails into wood, and you use it that way, you will conclude what? This is a terrible watch. This is my son's watch. I'm not going to do that to illustrate for you, but you need to know what it's made for if you're going to figure out what its telos is. What's its appointed function? What's its appointed role? If you conclude this is for pounding nails into wood and you use it that way, not only is it not going to work, it's actually destructive to the watch. It's destructive to it. Now, if you conclude that a watch is made for keeping time, and in turn it does that, you'll conclude, hey, this is a good watch. It's being employed for the task it was created to do. The Ten Commandments provide God's redeemed people with their telos. For us to engage in what I'll call the anti-Ten Commandments, for us to engage in the anti-Ten Commandments is like using a watch to pound nails into wood. It's ultimately unproductive and destructive to us. For us to live out the Ten Commandments is like using a watch to tell time. That's our telos. The Ten Commandments are showing us your telos, your appointed role, your appointed function for life in this world that God has made. Now, last week we looked at the first key to the good life, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, to love him like we love no one and nothing else. So let's press today on commandment number 2. Exodus chapter 20, verses 4 through 6. This is what the Lord told his rescued, saved, redeemed by grace people. He said, "You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments." Now, in some ways, I think this is the most difficult commandment to understand and therefore figure out how it works out in 21st century Christian life. So here's what I'm going to do with this one. I'm actually going to work through the passage in reverse order. The passage has a command, which you read at the top, and it's got a motive for obeying the command. I'm going to flip it, and I'm going to talk about the motive first and finish with what the command's about. Okay? I'm going to flip it. So I want to talk first about the motive for obeying this commandment. Now, Yahweh delineates a twofold motive for obeying the command: to avoid divine punishment and receive divine favor. It's twofold motive for obeying the command: to avoid divine punishment and receive divine favor. That's kind of the big idea of the motive. Now, there are English teachers, you could diagram this in your free time this afternoon if you need a break from life. You'll notice that there are some clauses and things that interweave, and it's all subordinated to this idea of avoiding divine punishment and securing divine favor. I want to work through that, but I don't want you to lose sight of the motive. Now, it may look initially like God is judging the children on the basis of the sin of the parents. But the text adds on, the third and fourth generation of those who hate me. So there's a balance to be kept here. God holds each one of us accountable for our own sin. God holds each one of us accountable for our own sin. A little later, Yahweh will explain to his redeemed people in Deuteronomy 24, fathers shall not be put to death for their children, nor children put to death for their fathers. Each is to die for his own sin. So there is no corporate guilt. Popular sentiment today, there is no corporate guilt. But on the other hand, the way the verse is phrased provides a solemn warning that our conduct affects not only ourselves, but our families and descendants. John McKay has a helpful reminder. He says, it is the home that is the primary training ground for the next generation. And religious decline does not arise from the failure of the church or the state, but from the failure of the family to live close to God. Benjamin Franklin has a rich and storied life. He was obviously one of the founding fathers of our country, inventor, scientist, diplomat. Toward the end of his life, he became one of the more prominent abolitionists. But you rarely hear about the fact that he fathered a child, William Franklin, out of wedlock and took up residence with a woman to whom he wasn't married named Deborah Reed. Benjamin Franklin's son, William, in turn, fathered a child out of wedlock, William Temple Franklin, who then spent much of his life living in an undisciplined and wasteful manner. It mattered how Benjamin Franklin lived. It mattered. Though his professional accomplishments are incredible, his personal legacy is certainly shrouded in darkness. It seems one generation after another learned from his way of life. And the results are in the annals of history for all to see. It matters how we live. I don't know who to give credit to this for, but as someone who has had a front row seat to church life, both as a pastor and prior to that a pastor's kid, the following has played out on countless occasions. Grandpa says church is essential. Dad says church is optional. Son says church is unnecessary until the grandson says, Jesus who? The flip side of the motive to obey the command is verse 6, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. Now, one can't help but notice the contrast in generations. Notice the contrast in generations. Punishment to the third and fourth, showing love to 1,000. I think we can say God is eager to bless countless generations as each takes up the mantle to walk with him and disciple the next generation to do the same. I think about this passage every time I hear about a first-generation Christian. Some of you are that. Some of you are first-generation Christians. Your family lineage was on the decline. There was no God, there was no Jesus, there was no gospel in there at all. And God stepped in, rescued you, saved you. And if Doc Brown was here charting it out for Marty McFly, you would say you are now on an alternate time continuum. A whole new path has been set for you. There's a whole new reality for you and your children and your grandchildren. Undergirding the motives to avoid divine punishment, receive divine favor, is Yahweh's declaration that he is a jealous God. This requires a little untangling. Jealousy, by the way, is not just an attribute of God. It's his name. Exodus 34, do not worship any other God, for the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. And when we talk about jealousy, we generally mean something more like envy, the desire to get something that doesn't belong to them. However, when something really does belong to you, there are times when it needs to be protected. A holy jealousy is one that guards someone's rightful possession. The most obvious example is the love between husband and wife. We looked at this last week, which is why 1 and 2, I think, are siblings of one another. No husband who truly loves his wife could possibly endure seeing her in the arms of another man. It would make him intensely jealous, and rightly so. It's God's right that he insists on your undivided loyalty and commitment. It is his right. This is what it means that he's a jealous God. It's his right to demand your undivided loyalty and commitment. That has not been popular in our modern world. Oprah Winfrey walked away from Orthodox Christianity when she was about 27 years old. Do you know why? Because specifically of the Bible's teaching that God is a jealous God. That he demands that he and no one else gets our highest allegiance and affection. To her, when God claims this, when God calls for this from his people, she said, this does not sound loving. Brad Pitt turned away from his boyhood faith. He says, because God says, quote, you have to say that I'm the best. It seemed to be about ego. End quote. Do you see the problem with both Oprah and Brad Pitt's view of God? It might sound like these statements are like very distant from where you sit, from your perspective, but I would say that there are shreds of their approach to God that still infiltrate the church. What have they done with God? They've reduced him to another creature. If another human being came up to me and said, get on your knees and worship me, I think I would probably be in Brad Pitt's camp. That seems to be about ego. But God is not another human being. God is not another human being. The Bible doesn't present God as the best version of a being like us. That's not even it. The Bible describes God as a different being altogether. Because he is both creator and redeemer, something neither Oprah nor Brad Pitt nor any of us are, he's deserving of something nobody else ought to receive. So God has a right to say to us, you owe me your undivided loyalty. There are consequences to be feared for not keeping this commandment, and there are blessings to be obtained for keeping this commandment. Now, with that laid as the foundation, you've got to be asking yourself, what is the commandment about that merits such a strong response if it's not obeyed? What's the deal with this commandment that causes Yahweh to threaten punishment and promise blessing? Well, let's look at the command. Verse 4, you shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. The story is told of a little girl hard at work with her crayons, tongue sticking out of her mouth. Her mother observed her daughter's intense concentration and asked, "What are you drawing, honey?" She said, "I'm drawing God." "But dear," said the mother, "nobody knows what God looks like." To which the child responded, "They will when I'm done." In some churches, debates rage over what exactly God forbids in the Second Commandment. Does this commandment forbid painting or sculpting images of Jesus or God the Father? Some Christians do believe this commandment prohibits art, especially representational art of the triune God, especially in a place of worship. Let's take it apart. If it forbids making images, it prohibits making any image. How do we know that? Well, the commandment does not say, don't make images of God. It says, you shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. That covers everything. Everything. Because there isn't anything anywhere except in heaven, on the earth, or under the earth. You with me so far? So if it prohibits making images, it prohibits making any and all images. That thing you built or made with your own hands out of wood, metal, fabric, paint, pencil, crayon. If it prohibits making images, it prohibits making all images. If the commandment prohibited locating images in a place of worship, it would contradict other commandments. After Yahweh gives Israel the law, which he explicates, exposits the 10 Commandments in the chapters that follow until we get to 25, in which God now gives them the blueprint for the tabernacle. And in that section of text, God tells Moses explicitly, Moses, go make 2 cherubim of gold. Go make a lampstand with cups shaped like almond blossoms and pomegranates, a blue and scarlet material. And I want you to do all that for the tabernacle. Cherubim are heavenly things. Almonds and pomegranates are earthly things. So if the second commandment prohibits making things or placing representational art in places of worship, the Lord didn't stick with his program very long. Let's be clear about what this meant. Keep in mind the motive. Why are the stakes so high? Why are the stakes so high? The second commandment prohibits making images for a particular purpose. To bow before them, to serve them, to worship them. Why would anyone be tempted to do that? It's another one of those where you woke up this morning and you were not tempted to do that. It was not an issue this morning. Well, let's remember the context in which this command was originally given. Israel has spent 430 years immersed in a polytheistic society where we are given no inkling whatsoever that God revealed himself with any kind of specificity to these people. A big problem that occurs in the beginning of the book of Exodus is a lack of knowledge of God. The book of Exodus subtitle could simply be the God who makes himself known. So 430 years immersed in a polytheistic society, images of Egyptian deities were central to their religious practices. Israel will discover the same to be true in Canaan. These ancient Near East religions believed their priests could perform certain rites that would bring the essence and presence of the deity into the image. Now, we don't need that. We don't necessarily need that knowledge to figure out what's going on here, because just a few chapters later, the Israelites break the second commandment. Remember the story? What was the story? Class, what was the story? Golden calf. We've got the infamous golden calf incident, which illustrates the concern of the commandment. Exodus 32, 1-5. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him." Aaron answered them, "Take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, and your daughters are wearing and bring them to me." So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then they said, "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, "Tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord." Here's the deal with this, folks. The jaw-dropping comment happens at the very last sentence. The very last sentence. Tomorrow there will be a festival to Yahweh. The golden calf is not a visible manifestation of the Egyptian sun god Ra or the Canaanite god Baal. The golden calf was a physical, visible manifestation of Yahweh. They were conferring on the golden calf the essence and the presence of Yahweh. What was happening that causes them to do this? Well, Moses, remember, was up the mountain. He was communing with the Lord. The Israelites get antsy. They want to get moving onward through the wilderness to this bountiful land they've been promised, but they don't want to leave without the presence of the God, whoever he may be, who parted the waters of the Red Sea. So they attempt to manipulate the presence of God by crafting a bull calf and conferring on it the presence of Yahweh. Now, what significance does this have for a modern day Christian? It's this. The presence of God cannot be manufactured nor manipulated. The presence of God cannot be manufactured nor manipulated. Access to the presence of God is determined by God. And we gain access to his presence on his terms alone. Now, the presence of God may be a vague term for some of you, and I don't want to leave you with the impression it's a modern evangelical made-up term. It's not. The term is used dozens and dozens of times in Scripture. At its most basic level, I'll explain it this way. Why was the Garden of Eden described as paradise? Why was the Garden of Eden described as paradise? Because it was God's dwelling place, not because it looked like Hawaii. It's described as a paradise, not because of its geographical attributes. It's described as a paradise because it's the dwelling place of God, the place of his presence. Why is heaven described as paradise? Because it's God's dwelling place, the place of his presence. So if heaven is a place you would like to go to someday, then understanding how access to God's presence works is something you ought to spend some time thinking about. So the first thing the Second Commandment says to us about God's presence is you can't manufacture a way to get into God's presence. You can't manipulate your environment in such a way that God will manifest his presence among you. If you want access to paradise, heaven, God's dwelling place, his presence, then you better follow his instructions. It happens on his terms alone, which is why Yahweh threatens and promises so much in this commandment. One of the things that I think the Second Commandment is anticipating is exactly how the tabernacle functioned. It's anticipating how the tabernacle would function. Think about the dynamics of the tabernacle and the sacrificial system. There was only one person in Israel who was able to experience the presence of God to any degree. One person. That's it. The high priest. And not whenever he wanted, by the way. One day a year, Day of Atonement. After thoroughly washing and making the appropriate sacrifices, he could enter the most holy place wearing the appropriate garb and bringing with him blood. It was God himself who spelled out, who allowed the high priest to experience his presence, but only by meticulously following God's detailed instructions. Access to God's presence is prescribed by God. And you say, so what? We don't live in Israel. We don't have a tabernacle. We don't have a sacrificial system. Right. But you want to be in paradise someday. You want access to God's presence. How do you do that if you can't manipulate it or manufacture it? Listen, if you are the least bit insecure over what's going to happen to you after you breathe your last, pay attention. Look at all the ways the New Testament writers build on the Second Commandment. John 14:6, Jesus answered, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you want access to the presence of God, you go through Jesus. John 10, Jesus said, I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. You want access to the presence of God, you go through Jesus. Ephesians 2, for through him, that is Jesus, we both, Jew and Gentile, have access to the Father by one Spirit. You want access to the dwelling place of God, you go through Jesus. Hebrews 10, we have confidence to enter the most holy place by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way opened for us through the curtain that is his body. You want access to the presence of God, you go through Jesus. Acts 4:12, salvation is found in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given to mankind by which we must be saved. You want access to the presence of God, paradise, heaven, you go through Jesus. That is God's prescribed means of accessing his presence. It can't be manufactured. It can't be manipulated. You want access to paradise, to heaven, the presence of God. It comes on God's terms alone. And his terms are Jesus Christ, the way, the truth, the life, the gate, the curtain. There is no other way. There is no other way into paradise. There is no other way to heaven than to enter through Jesus. What does it mean to enter through Jesus? I'll finish with this story. One of the most unexpected and crazy fun experiences that I had in my life was attending and watching the Daytona 500 from a luxury suite at Daytona International Speedway. While pastoring in my former church, I got to know a gentleman by the name of Wilson. Not a volleyball, a man. What he did for a living did not come up in our early conversations. He was from Georgia, and so we were talking a little bit about Southern culture and, at that time particularly my interest in NASCAR and, of course, his interest in NASCAR. Sometime after this, I discovered that he was the president of Pierce Manufacturing, which makes most of the fire trucks you see driving around. And not long after that, out of the blue, one day, he offered my wife and I tickets to attend the Daytona 500. And at the end of the email, he provided some details, a little bit sketch, not entirely clear, about where we should be and when we should be there. So we got to the Speedway on race day. We maneuvered underneath the grandstands to a door that doesn't look like it should be the door to a suite. You're underneath wooden stands, just like your bleachers in high school. We knock on the door, someone greets us, and they see that we have the appropriate passes, and then she asks us who we're guests of. And I said, Wilson Jones. The door greeter's eyes got very wide. Eyebrows went halfway up her forehead. My wife and I were then escorted by her to the front row of this suite and given a tour of it by someone who seemed to have become our personal attendant for the day. After showing us around, she escorts us through a labyrinth of walkways that lead directly out onto the track, where we are told we are now participants in the pre-race parade, in which we will ride in a fire truck and wave at tens of thousands of fans who think we've built this machine. The whole thing was very surreal. There were moments during that day where I thought to myself, babe, we have no business being here. None. Neither of us are clients or employees of Pierce. It feels a little weird, actually, to be here. Everybody knows each other. We know nobody. We didn't have the necessary righteousness. But the one person who did made a way. And the only thing we had to do was mention his name. His righteousness took care of the rest. And that gave new meaning to me when Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one enters this place except through me. On your own, you do not have the necessary righteousness to enter paradise. But Jesus does. So when you get to heaven's door, what will you tell God to get him to admit you into his presence? My hope and my prayer is that you will very simply and plainly say to him, I don't have the necessary righteousness to enter your dwelling place, but your son Jesus does. Admit me based on the righteousness that he has and has given to me by grace through faith in him. Let me try to wrap a bow around this. You see why God threatens and promises so much in this commandment, folks? Do you see why this is about more than art? You can't manufacture or manipulate your way into the presence of God. If you think your moral resume is going to be your admission ticket into paradise one day, you're going to be agonizingly disappointed. Generations have been deceived into thinking God welcomes into heaven those who have lived good lives. You can't manufacture or manipulate your way into the presence of God. Access to the presence of God, paradise, heaven, is determined by God. And he has said, my son Jesus is the only way in. Let me tell you something. The presence of God, the dwelling place of God, paradise, heaven, will be the ultimate good life. But it's accessed only through Jesus, the image of the invisible God. And so, I give you permission, all of you, on account of this, to be Jesus fanatics. The ultimate experience of the good life is the divine favor God offers those who are Jesus obsessed. Be Jesus obsessed. Let's pray. Gracious God, we are amazed and humbled that sinful creatures like us even stand a chance at entering paradise. We have no business being there. We don't have the necessary righteousness. But in your kindness and grace, you have made a way. You've made a way. Our debt has been paid by the blood of the Lamb. Jesus, the way, the truth, the life, the gate, the curtain, is the door through which we enter your presence, where there is fullness of joy. Fill us with joy now, even now in this moment, as we remember the great salvation that has come to those who cling only to Jesus. And we ask these things in his saving and wonderful name. Amen.